The late autumn wind swept through St. Petersburg with the promise of an early winter, rattling the windows of the Winter Palace as Crown Prince Feodor Duranov stood before his father, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Outside, the first snow of 1899 dusted the imperial gardens, but inside the private study, tension filled the air between father and son. The Austrian alliance must be secured, the Tsar stated, his voice leaving no room for debate. The marriage will proceed by spring. I've already informed Emperor Franz Joseph. Fyodor's gloved hands remained clasped behind his back, his posture military straight as he'd been taught since childhood. At 26, he had spent years preparing to rule, to sacrifice, to put Russia above all personal desires. As you wish, Your Imperial Majesty, he replied, his voice measured despite the tightness in his chest. I shall fulfill my duty. The Tsar's expression softened momentarily. This is for Russia, Fedya. For our family's security. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The Archduchess will make a suitable empress when your time comes. Fyodor nodded, remembering all too well the lessons of his youth. He had seen firsthand the dangers of a royal heart given too freely, his uncle's morganatic marriage that had nearly caused a succession crisis, his cousin's scandalous affair with a lady-in-waiting that had ended in tragedy. I've made a solemn vow, Fyodor said. My heart belongs to Russia alone. I will not repeat the mistakes of the past. As he left his father's study, Fyodor passed the grand portrait of his mother, the Tsarina, her eyes seeming to follow him with a knowing sadness. She had married for duty, not love, something she had never allowed him to forget. That night, as snow fell more heavily outside his window, Fyodor wrote in his journal by lamplight, I have promised myself never to love her. The Archduchess will have my name, my title, my loyalty, but never my heart. That is the price of the crown. 300 miles away in Moscow, Natalya Chernova sat at her desk in the university library, surrounded by ancient texts and historical manuscripts. At 23, she was one of the few women granted special permission to study at Moscow University's Department of Historical Archives. The daughter of a respected professor who had died the previous year, Natalya had been allowed to continue his work cataloguing the personal correspondences of Russian nobility throughout the centuries. More letters for you, Miss Chernova, said Mr. Petrov, the elderly head librarian, placing a wooden box on her desk. The Imperial Historical Society has requested your expertise on these. They belong to Princess Dashkova from Catherine the Great's court. Natalya's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the box. Inside lay bundles of yellowed papers tied with faded ribbons, the handwriting elegant and sloping across the pages. They believe these may contain previously unknown details about the Empress's political maneuvers, Mr. Petrov continued. The Crown Prince himself has taken an interest in the project. Natalya looked up, surprised. The Crown Prince? Interested in historical correspondence. Prince Feodor has always been a scholar at heart, they say. History, philosophy, literature, not just military matters like his brothers. The old man smiled. His Imperial Highness has requested detailed reports on any significant findings. That evening, as Natalya worked by candlelight in her modest Moscow apartment, she found herself drawn to one particular letter where Princess Dashkova had written, the truest power lies not in armies or treasure, but in words wielded with precision and courage. A carefully crafted letter may change the course of empires where cannons cannot. Inspired, Natalya began her report to the Imperial Historical Society with those very words, adding her own scholarly observations. She worked through the night, unaware that her analysis would soon travel directly into the hands of the Crown Prince himself. December arrived with brutal cold across Russia. In the Winter Palace, Fyodor found himself restless, spending hours in the Imperial Library while diplomatic preparations for his engagement to Archduchess Sophia continued. Your Imperial Highness, his private secretary announced, the reports you requested from the Historical Society in Moscow have arrived. Fyodor accepted the leather portfolio, dismissing the secretary with a nod. Opening it, he found meticulously organized notes and analyses, far more thorough than he had expected. The writer had not merely catalogued the letters but had drawn insightful connections between Princess Dashkova's personal correspondences and the political climate of Catherine's reign. Who wrote this? he wondered, flipping to the signature page. Asterisk respectfully submitted. Natalya Alexandrova Chernova. Research archivist, Moscow University. A woman. Feodor raised an eyebrow. Female scholars were still uncommon, particularly in such specialized historical work. He read further, finding himself captivated not just by the historical content but by the writer's voice, thoughtful, precise, occasionally even gently humorous in her observations. Against his usual habit, Feodor wrote a response that evening. Miss Chernova, your analysis of the Dashkova correspondence shows remarkable insight. I am particularly intrigued by your observations regarding the princess's role as confidant to the empress during the Pugachev rebellion. I would appreciate further examination of these relationships between royal confidants and sovereigns throughout our history. What makes such bonds endure when political alliances crumble? F. Duranov. He hesitated before signing simply with his initials rather than his full title. Something about the formality seemed at odds with the scholarly exchange he wished to establish. When the letter arrived at Moscow University bearing the imperial seal, Natalya nearly dropped it. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax seal, recognizing immediately that this was no formal acknowledgement from the Historical Society but a personal inquiry from the Crown Prince himself. "What is it?" asked her friend Irina, a fellow researcher. "You've gone pale." "It's from the Winter Palace," Natalya whispered. "From Prince Feodor himself." Irina gasped. "What does he want?" "He's asking about my research. He wants more information about royal confidants throughout Russian history." "Then you must give it to him," Irina replied pragmatically. "This could secure your position at the university permanently." That night, Natalya drafted her response, crossing out and rewriting several times before settling on a tone that balanced scholarly respect with the passion she felt for her subject. "Your Imperial Highness, I am honored by your interest in my humble analysis. Regarding your question about enduring bonds between sovereigns and confidants, I believe the answer lies not in political advantage but in honest counsel. History shows us that monarchs are surrounded by those who tell them what they wish to hear. Rare is the confidant who dares speak truth when it contradicts the sovereign's desires. Rarer still is the sovereign wise enough to value such honesty. In the attached pages, I have compiled examples from the reigns of Peter the Great, Elizabeth Petrovna, and your illustrious ancestor Alexander I, whose closest advisers often risked imperial displeasure to offer necessary counsel. Asterisk most respectfully. Natalya Alexandrova Chernova asterisk. She sealed the letter with a mixture of pride and trepidation, unaware that her words would reach the prince during one of the most turbulent weeks of his life. The Austrians are making further demands, General Volkonsky informed Feodor during their private meeting. They now insist that any children of your union with Archduchess Sophia be raised in the Catholic faith for the first 8 years. Fyodor's jaw tightened. Unacceptable. The heir to the Russian throne must be Orthodox from birth. Your father has indicated he may be willing to compromise for the sake of the alliance. Later that evening, after heated discussions with his father's advisers, Feodor returned to his quarters to find Natalya's response waiting. He dismissed his valet, poured himself a glass of brandy, and broke the seal. As he read her words about honest counsel and sovereigns who valued truth over flattery, something shifted in his chest. This unknown woman in Moscow, this archivist of history, seemed to understand the very struggle he now faced better than those who surrounded him daily. He stayed up until dawn, reading and rereading her examples, particularly drawn to her account of Alexander I's relationship with his sister Catherine, who had served as his most trusted advisor despite having no official role in government. Before the morning briefings began, Feodor wrote back, "Miss Chernova, your insights prove remarkably timely. How does one balance the demands of state with personal conviction? When advisors suggest compromise on matters of principle, does history favor those who bend or those who stand firm? I find myself drawn to your example of Alexander and Grand Duchess Catherine. Were there other instances where imperial siblings formed such effective partnerships? Please continue your candor. It is refreshing." F. Duranov. By February, snow blanketed Moscow as Natalya hurried through the university corridors. Over the past 2 months, she had exchanged 7 letters with the Crown Prince, each more personal than the last. What had begun as scholarly discussion had evolved into something she dared not name, a correspondence that now ventured beyond historical analysis into philosophical reflections, literary references, and veiled discussions of current palace politics. Another imperial letter. Irina asked, falling into step beside her. Natalya clutched the envelope tighter. Yes. He asks about historical precedents for imperial marriages that succeeded despite different faiths. The Austrian negotiations must be at a critical stage, Irina mused. The newspapers say the engagement announcement is imminent. That evening, in her apartment, Natalya hesitated longer than usual before writing her response. Something about this particular inquiry felt different, more urgent, more personal. Your Imperial Highness, on the matter of interfaith imperial marriages, history offers mixed guidance. While political alliances were certainly secured through such unions, the question of private happiness versus public duty remains difficult to measure across centuries. Perhaps most relevant is the case of your great-grandfather Nicholas I, whose marriage to Princess Charlotte of Prussia, later Empress Alexandra Feodorova, began as political arrangement but developed into deep mutual affection. Though she converted to Orthodoxy, she maintained certain Lutheran practices privately, with her husband's blessing. If I may be permitted a personal observation, the most successful imperial marriages in our history, regardless of differences in faith or background, shared one common element: mutual respect for each other's conscience. No lasting union, royal or common, can flourish when one party must completely surrender their deepest convictions. With deepest respect. Natalya she hesitated before signing only her first name, then sealed the letter quickly before she could reconsider. The engagement ball at the Winter Palace glittered with aristocracy from across Europe. Feodor stood beside Archduchess Sophia, performing the expected courtesies while feeling increasingly hollow inside. Their engagement had been announced the previous week, despite ongoing tensions regarding the religious upbringing of their future children. You seem distant tonight, Your Highness, Sophia observed quietly in French as they danced. Forgive me, Archduchess. The diplomatic negotiations have been taxing. Her blue eyes studied him carefully. They have been difficult for me as well. Perhaps we might find a moment to speak privately, without our respective advisors interpreting for us. Feodor looked at her with new interest. I would welcome that. Later, in a small antechamber off the main ballroom, Sophia surprised him with her directness. I know you did not choose this match, Your Highness, nor did I. But perhaps we might establish honesty between us, if nothing else. What would you have us be honest about, Archduchess? That neither of us wishes to surrender our faith or force our children to choose between their parents' beliefs. She met his gaze steadily. And perhaps that your heart is already engaged elsewhere. Feodor stiffened. What makes you say that? I recognize the look of a man whose thoughts are constantly drawn to someone absent. She smiled sadly. My brother wore the same expression for years before he finally married his Italian countess against our father's wishes. That night, after the ball, Feodor found Natalya's latest letter waiting. Her words about mutual respect for conscience struck him with unexpected force. He read the letter 3 times before sitting down to reply, Natalya. Tonight I met properly with the Archduchess for the first time. She is more perceptive than our diplomats suggested. She spoke of honesty and compromise, echoing, remarkably, your own observations about conscience and conviction. I find myself increasingly torn between the path laid before me and the road I might choose for myself. History celebrates the great political marriages that secured alliances, but says little of the personal cost to those who lived within those arrangements. You have become, over these months, something I never expected to find, a confidant whose wisdom I trust implicitly. I wonder, would it be possible to meet the mind behind these letters? I will be in Moscow next month for the opening of the new military academy. Perhaps we might arrange a meeting at the university library? With sincere regard. Feodor March brought the first tentative signs of spring to Moscow. Natalya read the prince's latest letter with a racing heart. A meeting. He wished to meet her in person. The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. You must refuse, Irina insisted when Natalya confided in her. He is engaged to an archduchess. Nothing good can come from such a meeting. It's a scholarly discussion, Natalya protested weakly. About historical research. Irina gave her a knowing look. Is that truly all it is? These letters have become more frequent, more personal. You keep them tied with ribbon in your desk drawer. Natalya flushed. He values my historical perspective. And you value far more than his imperial seal, Irina replied gently. Be careful, Natasha. The distance between Moscow University and the Winter Palace is greater than mere versts. After days of indecision, Natalya finally replied, Your Imperial Highness, I am deeply honored by your request to meet. However, I must respectfully decline. The valuable exchange we have established through correspondence serves both your inquiries and my research best when maintained within proper scholarly boundaries. Regarding your reflections on political marriages, history indeed records the diplomatic successes more readily than the personal sacrifices. Yet even in our modern age, duty and personal fulfillment need not always stand opposed. Perhaps the wisdom lies not in choosing between duty and happiness, but in redefining how they might coexist. Even Catherine the Great, for all her political pragmatism, wrote that the heart cannot serve the state if the state does not serve the truth of the heart. I shall continue to provide whatever historical insights you require, from my appropriate distance in Moscow. With deepest respect. Natalya Chernova After sending the letter, Natalya threw herself into her work, ignoring the hollow feeling in her chest. Feodor received Natalya's refusal while preparing for his journey to Moscow. The disappointment he felt was sharper than expected, confirming what he had begun to suspect. His interest in the archivist had grown beyond scholarly exchange. The archduchess has requested postponement of the wedding until autumn, his aide informed him during the train journey to Moscow. She cites the need for further negotiation regarding the religious arrangements. Feodor nodded absently, his thoughts still on Natalya's letter. Her mention of Catherine the Great's words about the heart and state resonated uncomfortably with his current situation. Despite her refusal to meet, Feodor found himself directing his carriage to Moscow University after the military academy ceremony. He told himself he merely wished to see the historical archives that had been the source of their correspondence. The university library was quiet when he entered, his guards remaining discreetly outside at his insistence. A few students and professors looked up in shock at his presence, bowing deeply as he passed. Your Imperial Highness, the elderly head librarian stammered, hurrying forward. What an unexpected honor. How may we serve you? I wish to see the historical archives, Feodor replied. Particularly the section housing the Dashkova correspondence. Of course, Your Highness. This way, please. The librarian led him through the main reading room toward the archives. Miss Chernova is actually working with those materials today. She's our foremost expert on 18th century noble correspondence. Before Feodor could respond, they turned a corner into a smaller reading room where a young woman sat alone at a large table, surrounded by document boxes and open manuscripts. She looked up at their approach, and for a moment, time seemed to suspend. She was not what he had expected. Somehow, through their letters, he had formed an image of an older, severe academic. Instead, Natalya Chernova appeared to be in her early 20s, with intelligent dark eyes and chestnut hair pulled back in a simple style. She wore a modest blue dress, ink-stained fingers clutching a document as recognition dawned on her face. Miss Chernova, the librarian announced nervously, His Imperial Highness Crown Prince Feodor has come to inspect the Dashkova archives. Natalya rose immediately and executed a perfect formal curtsy. Your Imperial Highness. This is unexpected. Miss Chernova. Feodor inclined his head, struggling to maintain his composure. I find myself in Moscow and wish to see firsthand the materials that have been the subject of our correspondence. The librarian looked between them in confusion. You have been corresponding with Miss Chernova directly, Your Highness. On scholarly matters, Natalya interjected quickly. His Imperial Highness has taken an interest in Princess Dashkova's role during Catherine the Great's reign. Feodor nodded, grateful for her quick explanation. Indeed. Miss Chernova's insights have been most valuable. Perhaps you might show me the original documents. The librarian, sensing tension he didn't understand, bowed. I'll leave you in Miss Chernova's capable hands, then. Please call if you require anything further. When they were alone, silence hung between them for a long moment. You refused my request to meet, Feodor finally said, his voice low. Yes, Your Highness. Natalya's hands clasped tightly before her. I believed it proper to maintain our scholarly distance. Yet here we are. He studied her face, seeing in her expression the same intelligence that had captivated him through her letters. Were you ever going to tell me how young you are? A flash of indignation crossed her features. Would Your Highness have valued my historical analysis differently had you known my age or gender from the beginning? The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. There's the directness I've come to expect from your letters. He stepped closer to the table, examining the documents spread before her. You were working on something specific today. Natalya hesitated before answering. Princess Dashkova's correspondence during her exile. When she spoke truths the Empress did not wish to hear. Their eyes met across the table. And what happened to the princess after her candor? She was eventually recalled to court, Natalya replied. Catherine recognized, in time, the value of a friend who would speak honestly when others only flattered. I see. Feodor picked up one of the letters, examining Dashkova's elegant handwriting. And what truths might you speak now, Miss Chernova, if imperial displeasure were not a concern? Natalya drew a deep breath. That I believe Your Highness came to Moscow not to see these archives, but their keeper. His eyes returned to hers, surprised by her boldness. And if that were true, then I would say that such a journey, however flattering, cannot change our respective positions. You are betrothed to an archduchess. I am a scholar from a modest family. Our correspondence has been a meeting of minds that I have treasured, but it can never be more. Feodor set down the letter, his expression unreadable. You referenced Catherine the Great in your last letter. About the heart not serving the state if the state doesn't serve the truth of the heart. I did. Do you believe that's true? That state and heart must align. Natalya considered her answer carefully. I believe that rulers who act consistently against their own deepest convictions ultimately fail both themselves and their people. History shows us this pattern repeatedly. Before Feodor could respond, the library door opened and his aide appeared, looking apologetic. Your Imperial Highness, forgive the interruption, but an urgent telegram has arrived from St. Petersburg. Your father requests your immediate return. Feodor's jaw tightened. Very well. Prepare the train. As the aide withdrew, he turned back to Natalya. Our conversation must end prematurely, it seems. Of course, Your Highness. He hesitated, then reached for her hand, pressing it briefly between both of his. Thank you for your candor, Miss Chernova. Always. After he departed, Natalya remained motionless at the table, her hand still warm from his touch, her mind racing with all the words left unspoken between them. The crisis that had summoned Feodor back to St. Petersburg was both diplomatic and personal. Austria had formally withdrawn from the marriage negotiations, citing insurmountable religious differences. The announcement had provoked a minor diplomatic incident, with rumors spreading that the Russian Orthodox Church had refused necessary concessions. This is most unfortunate timing, Tsar Nicholas frowned, pacing his study. With tensions rising in the Balkans, we needed the Austrian alliance secured. The terms were becoming increasingly one-sided, Father, Feodor replied. The Archduchess herself expressed reservations. The Tsar stopped pacing to study his son. Did she? Or did you? Both, I believe, Feodor answered honestly. A marriage built on mutual resentment would hardly serve Russia's interests. His father's expression softened slightly. Perhaps you're right. Still, another alliance must be arranged. The Romanov succession cannot be left to chance. In the weeks that followed, Feodor found himself unable to write to Natalya. Their meeting in Moscow had disrupted the comfortable distance of their correspondence, replacing it with something more complex and dangerous. Yet her absence from his life left a void that diplomatic meetings and military reviews could not fill. One evening in early April, his mother surprised him by visiting his private study. "You seem troubled lately, Fedya," the Tsarina observed, settling into a chair opposite his desk. "Is it the Austrian matter?" "Partly," he admitted, closing the book he had been attempting to read. "And partly something else," she pressed gently. "Or perhaps someone else?" Feodor looked up sharply. "What makes you ask that?" The Tsarina smiled. "A mother notices things. You've been distracted, requesting unusual books from the library on historical correspondence. And there is talk of letters arriving for you directly, not through your official secretaries." He remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. "You know," his mother continued, "I was not your father's first choice for a bride." This surprised him. "You weren't?" "No. Political considerations initially pointed him toward a German princess. But your grandfather, Alexander III, after seeing us together at a ball in Copenhagen, told your father something I've never forgotten." She leaned forward slightly. "He said, a Tsar must have a wife who strengthens him rather than one who merely extends his empire." Feodor considered this. "Yet you were still of royal blood. A suitable match by any measure." "True. But the principle remains valid." She studied her son carefully. "Who is she, Fedya?" "This woman who occupies your thoughts." After a moment's hesitation, Feodor told his mother about Natalya, their correspondence, her insights, their brief meeting in Moscow. The Tsarina listened without interruption. "A scholar," she said when he finished. "Educated, thoughtful, honest. These are not poor qualities in a potential Tsarina. She is not of noble birth, mother. Neither were some of Russia's most beloved empresses." The Tsarina rose, smoothing her dress. "Peter the Great's Catherine began as a peasant girl. History remembers her strength, not her origins." She moved to the door, then turned back. "I shall speak with your father. In the meantime, perhaps you should write to this remarkable young woman again. Silence solves nothing." That night, Feodor finally wrote to Natalya, "Dear Natalya, forgive my silence these past weeks. The diplomatic situation has been complex, though perhaps you have already heard that the Austrian engagement has been dissolved. Both parties agreed the match was not suitable. Our meeting in Moscow has stayed with me. You spoke of rulers acting against their convictions, ultimately failing both themselves and their people. I have reflected deeply on this wisdom. I find myself at a crossroads where historical precedent offers limited guidance. When the path of duty divides, how does one determine which fork to follow? Is it the well-traveled road of tradition, or the one that conscience illuminates, however untested? I would value your perspective, not merely as a historian, but as the woman whose letters have become essential to my understanding of both past and present. Yours. Feodor Natalya received Feodor's letter with trembling hands. In the weeks since their meeting, she had convinced herself their correspondence was finished, that whatever connection had formed between them had been severed by the reality of their encounter and the demands of his position. News of his broken engagement had reached Moscow, of course, prompting Irina to cast knowing glances in Natalya's direction. "You had nothing to do with this, did you?" she had asked. "Of course not," Natalya had replied truthfully. The archduchess and the crown prince had religious differences that couldn't be reconciled. Now, reading his letter with its unmistakable personal tone, Natalya found herself torn between joy and apprehension. Their correspondence had crossed into dangerous territory, no longer simply scholarly exchange but something far more intimate. After several attempts, she wrote, "Your Imperial Highness, thank you for your letter. I confess I had thought our correspondence concluded following our meeting in Moscow. Regarding your question about duty's divided path, history suggests that the most consequential choices are rarely between good and evil, but between competing goods. When tradition and conscience diverge, perhaps the question becomes, which choice will you explain with pride to those who come after you?" Empress Catherine once wrote that decisions made from fear, even fear of breaking with tradition, invariably lead to regret, while decisions made from conviction, however difficult initially, eventually find vindication. I hope this perspective proves useful in your current considerations. Respectfully yours. Natalya Chernova. She deliberately returned to a more formal closing, trying to re-establish the boundaries that had begun to blur between them. Yet even as she sealed the letter, Natalya knew her attempt at distance was mere self-protection against the feelings that had taken root in her heart. May arrived in St. Petersburg with unexpected warmth, trees in the imperial gardens bursting into bloom seemingly overnight. Feodor found himself spending more time outdoors, walking the palace grounds while contemplating Natalya's latest letter. Her words about decisions made from conviction rather than fear had resonated deeply. In the week since the Austrian engagement collapsed, his father had begun suggesting alternative matches: a Swedish princess, a distant Romanov cousin, even the daughter of a wealthy industrial family with connections to the British royal house. Yet none of these possibilities stirred anything in Feodor except a sense of resignation. His thoughts continually returned to Natalya, her intelligence, her honesty, the connection that had formed between them through their exchange of ideas. Your Highness, his aide interrupted his musings one afternoon, the Tsar requests your presence in the small throne room. Feodor found his father in conversation with the minister of the imperial court, reviewing documents spread across a table. Ah, Fedya, the Tsar greeted him. We're finalizing the summer schedule. The Swedish royal family has accepted our invitation to Peterhof in July. Princess Astrid will accompany her parents. Another marriage prospect, Feodor stated rather than asked. His father set down his pen. Minister Vorontsov, leave us, please. When they were alone, the Tsar gestured for Feodor to sit. Your mother has spoken to me about your correspondence with the Moscow archivist. Feodor stiffened. Miss Chernova has provided valuable historical insights. So I understand. The Tsar studied his son thoughtfully. Your mother seems to believe there is more to this exchange than scholarly interest. Father, the Tsar held up a hand. I have made inquiries about this young woman. Her father was Professor Alexander Chernov, quite respected in academic circles. Her mother came from minor nobility, distant Golitsyn relations. The girl herself appears exceptionally intelligent, modest in behavior, and by all accounts, virtuous in character. Feodor remained silent, surprised by his father's thorough investigation. She is not, however, of suitable rank for the future Empress of Russia, the Tsar continued. The Romanovs have always married into royal houses or the highest nobility. It is our tradition, our strength. Traditions evolve, father. Peter the Great married a peasant who became one of Russia's greatest empresses. Different times demanded different measures. The Tsar rose, walking to the window. The monarchy faces challenges now that Peter could not have imagined. Revolutionaries, industrialists, socialists, all questioning the very foundations of imperial authority. Our alliances through marriage have never been more important. Feodor joined his father at the window. What good is preserving the monarchy if we sacrifice the very principles it should represent? Courage, conviction, vision for Russia's future, not merely clinging to the patterns of the past. The Tsar turned to look at his son, surprise evident in his expression. You speak with unusual passion, Fedya. Because I have found unusual clarity. Feodor met his father's gaze steadily. Through my correspondence with Miss Chernova, I have come to understand that a ruler's strength comes not from whom he marries, but from the wisdom and conviction he brings to every decision. A long silence stretched between them before the Tsar spoke again. You believe you love this woman. I believe she would make me a better Tsar than any princess chosen for political advantage. The Tsar sighed heavily. I cannot approve such a match. The implications for the succession, for our international standing, I am not asking for your approval today, father, Feodor interrupted respectfully. Only that you meet her before making your final judgment. After a moment's consideration, the Tsar nodded. Very well. Have your Miss Chernova brought to Petersburg? I will grant her an audience. But I make no promises beyond that. The imperial summons arrived at Moscow University like a thunderbolt. Natalya was called from her research by the university rector himself, who handed her an envelope bearing the imperial seal with barely concealed agitation. "The Tsar requests your presence in St. Petersburg," he explained, eyes wide. "A special train has been arranged for tomorrow morning." Natalya's mind reeled as she read the formal summons. It mentioned only that her expertise in historical correspondence was required by the imperial court, no reference to Feodor or their letters. "This is most irregular," the rector continued. "But of course, we cannot refuse His Imperial Majesty." That night, as Natalya packed her modest trunk with trembling hands, Irina sat on her bed, face etched with concern. "This cannot be merely about historical research," she said. "Not a summons from the Tsar himself." "Perhaps the Crown Prince mentioned my work to his father," Natalya suggested weakly. Irina gave her a skeptical look. "Natasha, be honest with yourself. The Austrian engagement is broken. Now you're summoned to court. These events are connected." "That's impossible," Natalya whispered, though her heart raced at the possibility. "He is the heir to the Russian throne. I am nobody. Clearly, you are somebody to him." Irina squeezed her friend's hand. "Be careful, Natasha. Court politics are dangerous waters for an academic to navigate." The journey to St. Petersburg passed in a blur of anxiety. Natalya was met at the station by an imperial carriage and escorted not to the Winter Palace but to a smaller residence on Kameny Island, where she was shown to an elegant suite of rooms. "You will rest today," informed the lady-in-waiting assigned to her. "Tomorrow, you will be presented to their Imperial Majesties in private audience." Left alone, Natalya paced the ornate room, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Why had she been summoned? What did the Tsar want from her? And most importantly, would she see Feodor? A light knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found a footman bearing a small envelope. "Natalya, forgive this abrupt summons. My father has agreed to meet you before passing judgment on matters I will explain when we speak. Trust that your safety and reputation are protected here. Take courage, as you once wrote to me about Princess Dashkova. Sometimes speaking truth to power requires the greatest bravery, but also offers the greatest reward. Asterisk until tomorrow." Natalya pressed the note to her chest, understanding finally dawning. Feodor had told his father about their correspondence, perhaps even about his feelings for her. The realization sent equal measures of joy and terror coursing through her. The morning arrived with pale spring sunshine streaming through the windows. Natalya was dressed by ladies' maids in a gown that had mysteriously appeared overnight, modest in design but made of fine silk in a deep blue that complemented her complexion perfectly. "His Imperial Majesty prefers punctuality," the senior lady-in-waiting advised as she arranged Natalya's hair in a simple but elegant style. "Speak only when addressed directly. Remember to maintain proper forms of address." The audience chamber in the small palace was less imposing than Natalya had feared. When she was announced and entered with carefully practiced steps, she found only 3 people waiting, the Tsar and Tsarina seated in ornate chairs, and Feodor standing beside his father. Her eyes met his briefly before she sank into a deep curtsy before the imperial couple. "Rise, Miss Chernova," the Tsar commanded, his voice neither warm nor cold. "We have heard much about your scholarly work." "You honor me, your Imperial Majesty," she replied, thankful her voice remained steady. The Tsarina studied her with intelligent eyes. "Our son tells us you have provided him with valuable historical perspective through your correspondence." "I have simply shared my research, your Imperial Majesty." "Come now," the Tsar said, "let us speak plainly. This correspondence has clearly developed beyond scholarly exchange." He fixed Feodor with a pointed look. "My son suggests that your insights have influenced his thinking on matters of state and personal conviction." Natalya swallowed hard. "I have only offered historical context, your Majesty. The Crown Prince draws his own conclusions. Yet you write of emperors and empresses who followed their convictions rather than merely tradition," the Tsar pressed. "Some might consider such observations political rather than historical." History and politics are inseparable, Your Majesty, Natalya answered carefully. The decisions of past rulers shape our understanding of present challenges. I believe the strongest monarchs were those who understood both the weight of tradition and the necessity of carefully considered change. The Tsarina's lips curved in a slight smile. Well said, Miss Chernova. The Tsar leaned forward. And what is your understanding of the Crown Prince's current situation? Natalya glanced at Feodor, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. I understand that His Imperial Highness faces expectations regarding a suitable marriage alliance, she replied carefully. And that such decisions carry significance beyond personal preference. Yet you have continued this correspondence despite his former betrothal, the Tsar observed. Some might question the propriety of such an exchange. Natalya lifted her chin slightly. Our letters discussed historical matters, Your Majesty. If I overstepped proper boundaries, the fault is entirely mine. The fault, if any exists, is mine, Feodor interjected. I initiated and encouraged our correspondence because I valued Miss Chernova's perspective, her honesty, her intelligence, her understanding of how history informs present choices. The Tsar studied them both for a long moment. Leave us, Miss Chernova. Wait in the antechamber. Natalya curtsied again and withdrew, heart pounding. In the antechamber, she paced nervously, straining to hear the conversation continuing beyond the closed doors, but only murmured voices reached her. Nearly 30 minutes passed before the doors opened and Feodor emerged alone, his expression unreadable. What happened? She asked anxiously. Have I offended the Tsar? Instead of answering, Feodor took her hands in his. Natalya Alexandrova, from our very first exchange of letters, you have challenged my thinking and expanded my understanding of what it means to rule with both wisdom and heart. She stared at him, confusion giving way to dawning realization as he continued. My father has granted me the freedom to follow my conviction in this most personal of decisions, he said, his voice low with emotion. The decision that will shape not only my life but the future of Russia itself. Feodor, she whispered, using his name directly for the first time, what are you saying? He smiled then, bringing her hand to his lips. I am saying that I promised myself once never to love the woman I would marry. But your letters changed that resolve, and perhaps my destiny as well. Tears filled Natalya's eyes as understanding washed over her. The Tsar has consented. With conditions, Feodor acknowledged. A period of formal courtship. Private tutoring for you in court protocol and imperial responsibilities. A small elevation in your family status. His eyes held hers steadily. But yes, he has consented to the possibility of our marriage, should our affections prove as enduring as our correspondence. And the political alliances? The traditional expectations. My father has come to see that Russia's future security depends more on internal strength than external alliances. He squeezed her hands gently. And that a Tsar with a wife who strengthens his conviction rather than merely extending his empire might better secure that future. Natalya felt tears spill onto her cheeks. I never dared imagine. Nor did I, Feodor admitted. Until your letters taught me that sometimes the path of true duty leads where tradition fears to tread. He brushed a tear from her cheek. Princess Dashkova wrote that the truest power lies in words wielded with precision and courage. Your words, Natalya, had the power to change not just my mind, but my heart. As spring sunlight streamed through the palace windows, Natalya found herself writing a new chapter of Russian history, not with ink and paper this time, but with the promise of a love that had begun with letters and would continue in a shared life neither of them had dared to imagine possible.